economic purposes. So Royce, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Rick. I'm happy to be here today and try to give a little bit of a brief introduction about this concept of water quality on our oak rangelands. I'm going to try to follow the outline that's in the oak guidelines, and that is just a real brief overview of what erosion is, what we're talking about, and then cover the aspect of roads a little bit, and then finally finish up with the concept of protecting the soil in general. When the guidelines were actually published in 1996, the environmental water quality regulations at that time were not quite as strict as we have them here today. And because of that, there's just a little bit of a change. There's a lot of talk about some different ideas and concepts. So real briefly, we have both state and federal laws that govern water quality issues. We have the Environmental Protection Agency and our State Water Resources Control Board, who sort of oversee what these laws are and how to get them implemented. And they actually give authority to the regional water quality control boards, who then take these laws and then try to implement them. And essentially what they did a few years ago is they went through all the watersheds and assigned to them beneficial uses. Each of these beneficial uses, which include things like primary recreation, municipal use, agriculture use, secondary recreational, all have standards that are associated with them. And then they went back through all of these watersheds, and if the standards weren't met by what they had put on as beneficial uses, they declared those as impaired watersheds. If the watersheds are impaired, then they are required to go through and do a TMDL, or what is called a total maximum daily load. And through that process of doing the total maximum daily load, they have to come up with what are the sources that are causing the impairments and how can we control those. And the regional boards have three means to implement that, and one is a conditional waiver, where they can just say, well, if you'll just do certain things, we're not going to bug you anymore. Another is a basin plan prohibition, where if, for example, there's too much sediment coming out of a watershed, they can declare a prohibition that no more sediment can come from there. And then the landowners have to decide how they can do that. And then even in today's environment, there is still that third opportunity in some situations of voluntary compliance, where if you just do good land management practices, perhaps you'll get to the point where the regional board will say you're doing good enough. And with that, it leaves a lot of things that are difficult to deal with. What we're going to talk about today in terms of erosion, the definition is the detachment, transportation, and deposition of soil by wind or water. We're going to focus on just water today. And one thing to keep in mind is that erosion is actually a natural process, something that we actually want. And all of our farm fields are there because of erosion things that went on back in geologic history that eroded soils from an uplifted mountain and brought it down, deposited it into our valleys, and we have these really nice rich farm fields that we can grow crops with. And in fact, in some places it's really celebrated. Bryce Canyon National Park, for example, has structures that they call hoodoos, and they're kind of a nice long high pole where the chemical and frost wedging has created these structures that stand tall and are very nice looking now, and then through the erosional process of water carrying the debris away that's eroded from them. And many people go there each year just to see this because it's a fun place to go. But we also have things in our Coast Range mountains where it's very unstable conditions due to constant uplifting and changing because of our geology that's going on. And that can cause landslides and other things that are just a natural part of what's happening. When we get to other situations such as prescribed or wildland fires, perhaps that's a little different. It may or may not be natural erosion, and sometimes that can really be debated. And that brings us to the topic of accelerated erosion. And that's really what we want to focus on today, and what is important in terms of regulations. These particular accelerated erosion can come from things such as overgrazing, farming, road construction, or other construction of dealing with roads and or buildings. It's been said that there is enough soil eroded each day in the U.S. that you could fill a line of dump trucks 3,500 miles long. So it is a serious issue to consider. The types of erosion that we need to think about and worry about on our individual ranches and woodlands, first is splash erosion. And splash erosion is just like little explosions happening when a raindrop hits, and it can dislodge soil particles and move them. In addition, this raindrop impact can help seal a soil surface, which decreases the infiltration and increases the concentrated flow on the surface. And the other types of erosion that we need to think and worry about are rill erosion and gully erosion. Rills are defined as actually small gullies that are less than a foot deep and less than a foot wide. It kind of comes from the concept that if you're able to farm the land and you could run over it with a disc, you can easily fill them up and get rid of them. But once they start getting a little larger than that, then it turns into what they call a gully. When we get into stream erosion, again, that's another area where natural erosion can occur. But if it's doing it under a natural condition, if one bank will cut, the other bank will fill in. And so the stream stays in some type of a constant state, even though it may shift and move around. When things get out of balance and the streams downcut or widen beyond what their normal areas are, then we start worrying about the accelerated erosion. Through all of this, whether it's splash, sheet, rill, erosion, the main factor there to worry about is the whole concept of energy. And energy comes from the general equation is 1/2 mass times velocity squared. So anything that you do that speeds up the velocity in a concentrated flow of water, a little increase in velocity means a big increase in energy. And that's where we run into trouble. Roads is the main thing on ranches that provide the most sediment to streams. And therefore, if we focus on roads, that's where you get the biggest bang for the buck. All the processes, splash, rill, gully, erosion, occur on our roads, and even in stream if the roads actually either divert and or concentrate water and flow down into the channels. In terms of the regulations on water quality, if you have a road that does not have a regulatory or a connection to a stream, say, it simply erodes down and empties somewhere on your property, but never reaches that stream, it is not of concern in terms of water quality. It may be a big concern in terms of cost and maintaining that road and having access to it. But if the stream or road does have a connectivity to some stream or swell or water where it eventually gets to a stream, then the movement of that sediment does have a water quality impact, and that can become a very serious problem. Again, concentration of water is the main focus here. And when we deal with this, we need to think about many factors. You know, where is that road located? What kind of crossings do we have, whether it's a stream or a side ditch kind of a crossing? And what kind of drainage are we dealing with on those roads? First and foremost is a good location. Put that road where it can drain. The three main things to think about with roads are drainage, drainage, and drainage. So if you got a road such as the one shown here in this picture, it's at the base of a very steep slope, but yet it's up out of the bottom of the swell. That provides an area for the water to drain off, get off that road, keep it well drained, and it's a very low slope and some other aspects there that make it a good location. Other areas can have constant trouble if they're not in the right location. In terms of minimizing that water concentration, the main factor, the main thing that causes problems are these outside berms that can be created through grading of roads. If they are there, that holds the water in, it creates that water concentration and hence the increased energy. Anything you can do to reduce that can really help with our roads and keeping them from this erosion problem. In crossing streams and or the ditches alongside ditches, especially if it's a stream, the most important thing is designing those crossings in a way that you do not interrupt the flow of the stream, or especially if you have fish habitat concerns. And therefore, bridges are very expensive, but they would be the best thing that could be done. After that, fords or low water crossings, and then culverts. Culverts, though, can create a lot of problems, and I'll talk just a little bit more about those. First and foremost, they need to be of the proper size. They need to be able to withstand a storm size that they call the 100-year event. And so most years you may look at a culvert and say, oh, it's handling the flow just fine, but once in a while we get that really wet year, and that's when the washouts occur. One thing to keep in mind is that, for example, if you decide you need a 72-inch culvert, 3 24-inch culverts do not equal 1 72-inch culverts. In addition, the smaller culverts, even if those 3 smaller culverts will handle the flow, they are much more likely to get clogged up due to debris that's flowing down. And then you need to make sure the maintenance is done, and if they're caved in or rusted out or other things, that they're taken care of and installed properly is also a very important factor. If you are using a culvert that is in a stream where fish passage is of interest, you need to use a very large culvert and actually bury part of it into the stream so that the stream, then the bottom of that culvert becomes the stream channel. That allows those fish to be able to move through a culvert and helps reduce the energy that would prevent them from swimming through it. If you have the low water crossings, you need to put them in a proper location. Do not do any straightening of channels or altering the flow course, so you need to choose a spot that you can come in at a 90-degree angle and make a cross. In some situations, you may have to harden that crossing. The other problem that could occur with low water crossings is you can only use them during low flow times. In the winter, if there are roads that you can get away without using them, you can do some things to help minimize impacts in the winter. Simple things such as putting mulch in places or reseeding. Actually, if you can leave vegetation on a road, that's only used occasionally, that is probably one of the best ways you can go. Maintenance needs to be done very carefully. If you can minimize the use, grade them when they're damp. Eliminate that outside berm. Again, that's probably one of the major things on roads that I have seen that can cause problems. Avoid cutting and scraping the cut banks or the fill banks and things like that. The next one, protecting soil, real briefly, because Morgan covered this very well with his talk on grazing. But it was noted as long as 100 years ago that having bare soil that was related to excessive grazing that Morgan talked about that occurred during that time period led to floods and a lot of erosion. What happens is that the rainfall falls, that energy and that residual dry matter that Morgan had talked about, first of all, it absorbs the energy of the raindrops. It slows that water down as it hits that soil surface and moves along the top of the soil, allowing it extra time to infiltrate and go through the subsurface and groundwater recharge that it should do. In addition, that extra soil or vegetation improves the soil structure, which also helps improve infiltration. Morgan talked a lot about residual dry matter. That is the #1 thing you can do in helping to prevent erosion overall on a ranch. He also talked about stocking rates. My hat's off to the ranchers around here trying to get the proper stocking rate. It's very difficult because the variations we have in our rainfall patterns can give us a variation as much as 5,000 pounds per acre production. And if your production per acre is changing that much on a year-by-year basis, you have to adjust livestock numbers. It's a very difficult thing to do. The whole concept of reseeding. If you want to try to do that, do you use annuals or perennials? Reseeding perennials into our Mediterranean type rangelands is very difficult. It can be done, but takes a lot of effort. So just to sum this up real briefly, roads is the largest source of sediment on the ranches. We need to protect the soil, residual dry matter, the grazing management that Morgan talked about. Reseeding is a possibility, but it's hard to do. Oftentimes, though, just by some rest, the annuals that are there will really help cover that soil. And as a rancher in Parkfield, Jack Varian likes to say, if I can slow the water down, I will grow more grass and I will sell more beef. And that takes it away from our regulatory area and puts it back into the economic as well as protecting the watersheds. So with that, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Royce. We'll capture any questions in that area at the end.